typically we have a name in place because they're really good at one thing. And what you're saying is we don't stop there. All right, we're going to create some sort of scorecard. It sounds like you work with companies to say, what is that scorecard? What's important to you? What are you looking for?
The evaluation that we went through went beyond a gut feel, but it also put metrics together that made sense. And the result was really positive. At least annually, maybe every 6 months, that the CEO is prepared to talk to the board about the succession plan.
You're listening to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, a podcast that delivers value and offers up insight that'll help your credit union grow. ServiStar has been consulting with credit unions for over 20 years, growing them in the areas of cultural development, leadership development, and management training. To learn more about what ServiStar can do for you or your credit union, check them out at ServiStarConsulting.com.
Welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. You're going to want to tune into this one, whether you're a CEO about to retire or not, or if you're on the roster of potential uprising potential in your credit union, this is for you. You get the playbook from Jerry Nelson on what it takes to be on the list, the short list, if you will, to succeed your current credit union CEO. Peter Tyson was on the ones and twos with us. Peter, what did you take away from this podcast that these listeners are about to listen to?
Man, if these leaders take the opportunity and listen to this podcast, it's going to be fantastic. They're really going to learn a lot about board succession and succession planning for your credit union, how important it is, and how important it is to make sure that you're training the people underneath people to be successful going forward, because that's what's going to make you successful. It's going to make the people underneath you successful and the credit union successful going forward. So I think it's a great podcast. I hope you take the time to listen to it here.
Let's roll the tape.
Welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. I am super excited for our topic today. It's going to be a little different than what we've had. I'm joined here with Peter Tyson and Jerry Nelson, both well-versed in working and helping the board of directors to have a credit union that lives out its mission. And Jerry, you've worked with as a board member, I believe, and then also with numerous credit unions and preparing for the transition in one of the most pivotal roles, a CEO. And Peter, someone who works with us at ServiStar, is one of our board members, but not only that, he's working with aspiring leaders who hope to be considered for that position in the future. And I was really excited to get y'all in the same room and have this discussion. And I think this is a pivotal time to have it. 2026, the NCUA released the rule, and the rule to help people find their replacements as a CEO. And Jerry, I want to open it up to you first. What keeps going wrong with credit unions that this rule is now in place?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that the NCUA has been concerned about is the number of mergers that have taken place over the years, particularly with smaller credit unions. And I don't think they see that as a good thing. And because of that, they have, as you mentioned, issued this mandate that all credit unions, regardless of size, have a succession plan in place. And they've given that responsibility to board of directors. Now, boards, they are also confronted with the question, what do we do if we lose the CEO? And what's our next step, and how do we deal with that? And probably a secondary question is how does a credit union develop leadership or to transition into that? And so that's, I think, the NCUA's concern. And they want well-run credit unions. They want productive credit unions. They want member-based credit unions, and they want to have certainly good leadership. So in essence, that's why they've thrown the mandate out there. I think it's interesting. I think most organizations, they understand the importance of compensation, the people being paid properly. They understand the importance of performance management, evaluating performance, for their people. But the third leg of a three-legged chair that's been missing over the years is succession planning. And it's difficult to do. People don't necessarily want to identify who their replacement would be because, maybe somebody's going to get the idea they're going to move in and take my job. But it's really a very important piece. And those three legs of the stool, if you have compensation, performance management, and succession planning in place, you're pretty sturdy. And so I guess the impetus that I had and my group had was seeing that this succession planning leg was not maybe where it should be.
In talking about that, one of my favorite companies is Ramsey Solutions, Dave Ramsey, who's on the journey to help people win with money. And just hearing him talk about succession planning is something he's been working on for the past 10, 15 years. And it's been an up and down because we'll probably talk about with some of your stories of he thought he found someone and then it didn't work. And then of finding and developing talent, which is one of the things you said is one of the key legs on the stool. Now, with this idea of, all right, we see this problem, we see why this is here, so we want to develop this stool. Now, the question is, where does a succession now? That's where your company, right, Jerry?
Correct.
Where did this start? I'm assuming you came from a place where you understood this was a need before the NCUA even developed it. What's your story here? Is it from pain? Is it from excitement? What drove you to start this company?
Well, I had a company, it was called HRN, Human Resource Network, and that company, we developed HR tools for the world, but in particular for credit unions. We had compensation tools, performance management tools, and at one time probably had over 1,500 credit union clients. And so we had a lot of experience in that particular area. Even back then, succession planning was being talked about, but not, be honest, not very much.
Hmm.
And it's something that was a little bit on my radar, but I ended up selling that business and just kind of thinking maybe I was done, but I wasn't, and continued working for credit unions and helped credit union boards. And actually, there was a board for a large client that I was working with that asked about helping put together a succession plan. I thought about it, and so that was the impetus. And that was probably 3 or 4 years ago. That came out well before the NCUA mandate came out.
How far
And
in advance were they thinking about their replacement when they asked you to help with the succession planning?
well, it would have been 5+ years. It wasn't
Okay.
really, interestingly. In fact, that CEO is still in place, and it's been, like I said, 4 or 5 years. And she's probably still a year or two away. So, yeah, they were forward thinking, but it was the nudge for me to say, okay, now someone really wants this. So let
Yeah.
me put some things together. And, it began just kind of an Excel spreadsheet or an Excel platform to put something together, but it worked. It was well received. And then a couple other credit unions got wind of it and asked about it. And so, it just prompted me from what I'd gone through over all the years to say, yeah, we really need to step up now and make this happen because it is a need,
Hmm.
and that's been borne out. And then the NCA's helped that a little bit by saying we credit unions need to have this, so I can't complain about that. But that the process was in place, and I think it's been moving along. It's becoming more perfected, and the input we get is always helpful, of course. So.
Yeah, and essentially you're helping credit unions build a system so they're being proactive instead of reactive. And there was a quote that you say a lot, which is the best time to plan for succession is when you don't need to. The worst time is when there's a crisis that forces your hands. It sounds like how you started was, hey, they didn't need to. It was 5+ years. So this gave you room to really look at key aspects, what you wanted to develop, what were the gaps, how to do that. But it also sounds like this quote comes from a place of pain or from some clients you've worked at. My question for you is, what does this crisis on our hands? How would I rephrase this? A credit, you might say we're good right now, and then all of a sudden it becomes a very, very important issue. What have you seen with clients you've worked with?
Yeah, I think yeah, number one, just to kind of rephrase that, maybe just a touch, is I don't think there's a board on the planet that wants to go outside and hire a new CEO.
Yeah.
That's brain damage. That's really hard, and a lot of boards aren't equipped to do that. They would love someone in place in an organization that can elevate up and take over. That's kind of the way it is, and I think that to recognizing that piece has been really, really important. The problem is, I think, with many credit unions, when they might say, oh, we have something in place, a lot of times we have a name in place. We know that my successor is going to be Bill or it's going to be Sue. And because maybe they're tenured, they've been there a long
Mm,
time. It's kind of like this, let's take a basketball player, for example. A basketball player is really a good offensive player. And that's what most of the public sees, who scores the most points. But for the people who know, maybe this person can't play defense, and that's really important. And you take a person as an example, they might be really a high performer in a particular position, maybe that's CFO, maybe it's CTO, maybe it's one of these other chief positions. But do they have the necessary skills and talents to step up to be the CEO that might require playing defense in addition to offense? So it might be different. So the question to us was, how do we assess that? And so the things that we looked at is first identification, and you look inside an organization and say, who are those potential successors that could step up? And we look at their past, and their past as what level of experience have they had? What's their tenure? What's their loyalty? Do they want to step up? Do they have that desire to do that? And that's collecting very important information, because experience and seasoning is important. The other thing, though, we want to look at the current, and that kind of gets into what we call the evaluation stage. Are there any gaps or concerns with these particular people? It's not bad to have them. Everybody has gaps and conditions of concern we need to deal with, but if they're identified, then they can be worked on. So that becomes a little bit of the evaluation or the assessment of the current situation. Are there any conditions, some rough edges that need, if you will, that need to be smoothed over a little bit?
Yeah.
And then the third piece is, okay, let's look at the future. What potential do they have? Let's look at some key metrics that would help us identify what their future might be. And if you look at those past, current, and future and put those together in somewhat of a scorecard, then we've got a systematic approach. If you got a minute, I can just give you a quick example on that.
Yeah, please do. This is fascinating.
So, I was working with, and this wasn't the CEO, this was actually a CTO, was helping them with their succession plan. We went through this evaluation that I just described, and as we were completed, he looked at me and he said, "Jerry, this is showing I should select this person. We'll call this person Sue." And that's not who I would have selected. I would have taken John. And I said, "Okay, let's go back. Did we do something wrong? Let's reevaluate. Maybe we've made a mistake." And he said, No, we've done it all right. That makes sense. That's who it should be, I guess. Well, interestingly, within a month, that individual had a heart attack. Now, it wasn't fatal, luckily, but he was out of pocket for about 3 months. Well, who did he pick to take over while he was gone? The person that had evaluated the highest. How'd that person do? Well, she did wonderful. It was great. And so it proved that the quantitative analysis, the evaluation that we went through, went beyond a gut feel, but it also put metrics together that made sense. And the result was really positive.
Wow, this is fascinating. So what I'm hearing you say is typically we have a name in place because they're really good at one thing. And what you're saying is we don't stop there. All right. We're going to create some sort of scorecard. It sounds like you work with companies to say, what is that scorecard? What's important to you? What are you looking for? And then you say, all right, based on the candidates or the name that I already have in place, I'm looking at what have they done in the past? What are they doing currently? And then what I always say is, where's their leadership gold? Where do they need to be refined to be even better in this role? Peter, I want to bring you on to talk about, there's two ways we could go with this. One is, all right, as a board member, y'all have recently hired a CEO. Is that correct in the past few years? Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, we did. We hired a CEO about 2.5 years ago now. And so, what Jerry just said was very true. We didn't want to go outside, but we did go outside, right? And that there was a lot of discussion about that. Are there people in place, in the credit union right now that are ready to take that spot? And so we had a lot of discussions about that. I don't want to get all those details, right? We're not going to get into that, but it's fascinating because I think one of the things we talked about was something you kind of mentioned, Jared, right? I'm not sure. I'm a little careful here. Our CEO did a great job preparing the folks under him to take his position going forward. And I think we've seen that in other credit unions as well, right? I think to some extent, Jared, I'd love to hear some feedback from you on this. Is the CEO sometimes resistant to helping to train people underneath them to replace them? Because I've come across that and I've seen that and I understand that, right? Because I'm going to announce I'm going to retire in 6-12 months or whatever, and then I'm going to be seen as a lame duck CEO. And so do I really want to spend this time, preparing that next person for my role? And I'm going to, maybe not go out graciously. I'd love some feedback from you on how you think the CEO plays a role in that succession planning. Are they doing enough to get the people underneath them prepared?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think there's an innate fear among a lot of us. If we prepare somebody to take over our job, actually take it over. And it's really kind of a little bit of the wrong way to look at that. But I think that the CEO plays an enormous role because with credit union boards, they might spend 1 or 2 hours a month at the credit union and not a lot more. So they really can't have that level of expertise or understanding or operations of the credit union like the CEO has. So, but the CEO sometimes may need to be prompted. And so we think kind of our recommendation is at least annually, maybe every 6 months, that the CEO is prepared to talk to the board about the succession plan and update the board on that. I think it's really important to do that. Now, by the board requiring or asking or maybe even insisting on that, then it puts the CEO in place that this is something important. I need to do this, and helps them put things together. But really, it's the CEO who has so much of the information and knowledge that's so important. Now, the discussion with the board is critical, and that CEO, can describe who the potential candidates are, talk about their readiness. Are they ready now? Are they ready in 2 years or three? What blind spots do they have that we're working on? That's all really, really good. And I think by the CEO doing that for his or her position, the next step falls in place. Let's get it ready for the rest of senior management, which also is actually part of the NCUA mandate. But let's have our other chiefs and SVPs and VPs do a plan as well, so we can create that bench strength in the organization. Now, this has been an interesting thing. Sometimes these potential successors might not be in a manager's or executive's downline, meaning they're not a direct report. It might come from another area of somebody who just has demonstrated that skill and talent to be considered. One large credit union we worked with, one individual was named on 4 succession plans, and he didn't report to any of them, but they recognized this individual's skill and ability and talent, and wanted them to be at least considered as a potential successor. So there's just some really good things that can come out of this when it's looked at through a systematic,
Yeah.
quantitative and qualitative process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man,
So,
or you keep going, Peter, because I'm about to go somewhere else. Keep going.
yeah, because I think what we have found in some of our research as we've gotten into this target leadership is kind of what you were talking about. A lot of our people that are succeeding CEOs within the credit union space are not prepared to take that job.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing a pretty high, what I'll call failure rate, but it may not be a failure rate. It's not like they're driving their credit union into the ground, but the credit union isn't growing, right? And you can see that person isn't capable of leading people. And I think that goes right back to that succession plan. So I mean, that's what we have tried to focus on in my program, is getting the next generation prepared to take that role, which I'm not sure all boards or CEOs have done a great job at. So we're trying to fill that gap as much as we can. So
it makes them look good on your scorecard, essentially, is what I'm hearing.
correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing with this idea is we're talking about, all right, what does good succession planning look like based on your experience, Jerry, and what you've worked with people? And one thing I heard, and give me a thumbs up or like, no, let me clarify. One thing I hear is we need to be proactive, not reactive. So a great development plan, view succession planning as a development plan of ideally 5+ years. We don't want this to be like, oh, I went to the hospital. I need a replacement right now. Thank God they did that scorecard and found out that Sue was going to be really good. And that leads to the second thing is I'm hearing we need to create a scorecard that analyzes what have they done in the past, what are they doing currently, and where do I see potential. And then I'm also hearing, all right, the CEO is key in succession. So working, developing, it might need to be a mindset shift where it's not I'm a lame duck. But no, I'm leaving the legacy. I'm continuing the legacy by training someone else. And part of this is updating the board on the status every year of, hey, this is what we said a few years ago. This is what we followed through on. This is what's changed. This is who we're thinking of. Or, hey, these are some people we're changing. And then you said something, and Albrecht, this reminds me of when we got to interview the former CEO of Remax, like the Realty Group. Yeah. He strongly suggested He called it the 3-3-3 rule. So as a CEO, you find three executive leaders that you want to train and develop that could potentially take your place, but you don't stop there. You say, hey, I'm training you and I'm expecting you to take three people and train them to potentially be your replacement and tell those people to find three people to work and develop to potentially be their replacement. Uh, when I say that, Jerry, how does that relate to the experience you've seen?
Well, I think it's dead on, quite honestly. I think if you're able to do that in an organization, you certainly have developed bench strength and you've got a systematic plan. I think when we talk about this, the scorecard, and I think it's something, I don't know, maybe it sounds a little unusual and it is very quantitative. And that's a really important part. But I think the other thing that, in addition to that, that we need to recognize when we're dealing in the credit union world is the cultural fit. Because the culture of a credit union is unlike any other in business. Uh, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to use this word, but I was in banking for 13 years. And so I was an executive in banking before I got into consulting and working with credit unions. I understand that industry. And like I said, it's vastly different than the credit union space. I mean, in credit unions, for example, they do have a fiduciary responsibility. They need to make sure the credit union is performing well financially. I mean, and in credit union world, that's making loans. That's what credit unions are in business for, is to make loans. And so they make loans to members, and they need to bring in what we call relationship shares. That's the low cost deposits. That helps. And they need to also identify non-interest income. Those three aspects create productivity. And with that, then they can go out to the credit union members and say, because we've been so good in productivity, we can lower your loan rates. I think everybody would like a lower loan rate,
Yeah.
and we can increase your dividend rates, and maybe we can provide some services that we haven't offered before that's going to be beneficial to the members. And then by doing that, we've created member value. Now, in the credit union world, and it's the only industry I know of where having a lower net income or a lower ROA might be a good thing because what that might indicate is you're providing more service to members. And so as long as your net worth is good, yeah, that ROA doesn't have to blow it out every year. You can give that back to members, and that's really unique. So in looking at succession planning, that cultural fit becomes an important piece. And sometimes I've seen credit unions where they've gone out and they've hired, say, a banker without banking acumen,
Mm.
if you will,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they failed because they've got in. And when they get a question like, "Oh, did you go help, Sally Smith with her checking account this week?" Well, banking exec. I'm like, what? I don't understand that. But that's an important thing. And are we giving the members the service we need? Those are questions, and that's the culture. And
And
so,
Jerry, Jared, do you have any tips on that cultural fix? I know that's a thing that a lot of people talk about, right? You bring a new CEO or even a senior manager over. You talk about that. I believe that wholeheartedly, right? It's got to be the right cultural fit, but sometimes you don't know that till it's too late. You think it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't line up. Any tips as to how that can be managed in an effective way?
okay, I think for internal candidates, we're talking internal because we're talking succession planning.
Yeah.
I think that can become evident by the level of current performance that they're exhibiting, and I think through the discussions and the mission statement. Uh, Let me give you another example. Okay, so there's this large credit union we're working with, and their mission statement was to serve the underserved or to serve the unbankable. In other words, the low income individuals. That
Hmm.
was their mission statement. But as we looked at their loan portfolio, 95% of their loans were made just to A or A plus borrowers. In other words,
Mm.
just just the ones that you might say, you know, might not need a loan, but
Yeah.
but they weren't actually doing what their mission statement was saying. So that the culture would say then we got to start making loans to the B, C, and D borrowers. That's what our credit union is about. And beyond it took a while for that to be embraced because it was changing that culture. And it took a few years before they made that start happening. Well, it's been marvelous because that credit union grew from a 1.5 to over almost a $5 billion credit union.
Wow.
And with everything else checking the boxes being successful. So It starts at Peter, it kind of starts at the top, I guess. The board needs to certainly put that out there. The CEO has to be a strong proponent of that, and it needs to be passed on down to the other executives and the rest of the organization so they understand that. And it'll sometimes it does take a time to get that. But I know myself, when I finally understood that having a lower ROA in the credit union world is okay if you're providing good service. Being a former banker, that took a while. But once I understood that, then I understood the culture and the mission and the importance of doing that.
And what a beautiful example of the mission, because there are a lot of credit unions where it's almost like lip service. They say, hey, serve the unbankable or help people win with money, yet the outcomes they're measuring and the behaviors they want may not be reflective of what we're truly about. In this story, you found someone that was, hey, this is our mission and this requires change. And that can already be hard in itself, because as a leader and you're bringing in change and it's a good change, you're still going to get a lot of resistance because people are like, wait, is this the best thing for us or for me? Or, hey, we've been doing this always. Why are you telling me to switch up everything? Man, really, really good stuff. I want to come back to this, but we're going to take a quick break and listen to an ad from our sponsors to see what's going on. ServiStar's target leadership. Credit unions executives, we cannot afford to have breakdowns in key leadership areas. If you have breakdowns in communication, what's that going to create? Unnecessary conflict, drama, and just dropping the ball. If we have breakdowns in relationship, what does this create? Mistrust, toxic environments. If there's breakdowns in alignment, we're wasting effort. We're losing time. There's division. Breakdowns in execution. Oh my gosh, we're talking about unmet goals, missed deadlines, blown budgets, and damaged credibility. These are the things you don't want. What you need to do is gain insights into your strengths and weaknesses by diagnosing each of these leadership areas and pinpointing opportunities for improvement. And guess what? ServiStar Consulting and Giant Worldwide are joining forces to nurture credit union leaders who can inspire. We've got a certified coach, Peter Tyson, who is going to test these out and work on these skills to help you develop your talent, your alignment, your reflection, your growth, your engagement, and tailored coaching sessions, one-on-one coaching sessions where you get to reflect what you've learned on during these courses. This is a great thing. If you've taken Emerging Leaders and Vertex, this is the next step in your leadership journey. This is meant for managers, directives, and executive leaders. It's also meant for people that want to become executive leaders. So don't wait. Sign up today. The link is in the show notes. All right, let's get back to it. And I want to bring, Peter, your perspective, because this idea of our internal, and Jerry, what I had written that you said was internal, what is their current level of performance? Are they exhibiting the mission? And Peter, you with the CEO of ServiStar created our target leadership program to prepare current or aspiring leaders to be the next generation of executive leaders. And I'm almost thinking, all right, with this idea, Jerry, of measuring, how do you create a measurement system to see if these candidates are ready, the scorecard? I'm thinking from target leadership, what are some of those things? And one of the things Jerry mentioned was finding your blind spots, which, man, we definitely do that in target leadership. But I'm also thinking, Peter, you meet with a lot of people. Part of that session is you do individual executive level coaching, like 1 or 2 sessions. In our sessions, we've seen people get promoted from a middle manager to an executive level position while in your course. Hearing what Jerry's talking about, what are some stories you have? And what I want to do is ideate, and maybe Jerry, you already have some, but what could be something we would want to put on that scorecard with some of the things that we've seen in target leadership, Peter?
That's a great question. I think we could probably talk for hours about that, but I'll bring up one that I really, Scott's looking at his watch. I don't think we got hours, but we'll go with what we got. I'll bring up one that I really enjoy. It was a CEO of a relatively small credit union. And what we do, Jerry, is we use the Giant leadership assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with Giant at all. So we break it down into 5 voices. Each person's assigned a voice based on assessment. And we talk about how that voice causes them to act, right? And how others perceive them with that voice and how they can use that to their benefit and help to build better relationships with folks as they progress. One of the CEOs was tested as what we call a pioneer, which is a small percent of the population, probably the most aggressive of the 5 voices, right? Very strategic thinkers. They push people and they're always trying to push their ideas on others. And any good leader really knows that I can't push all my ideas on other people, right? I need to hear from them, right? Mm-hmm. And so this person started to realize as we had these conversations, went through these assessments, that what he needed to do was spend more time, listening to what his employees were telling him. And he did that. And we had talked a while after that. And he said it made a huge difference in his credit union, right? He was empowering the people underneath him. And that's kind of the goal of what we want to do at Target Leadership, is to empower them, because that helps to create the next generation of leaders. What I found in my, research is that, a lot of leaders like to dictate what their employees are going to do, right? And that may be successful for them in the short term, but it's not good for the people they're working with, and it's not good for the organization long term. So how can we get people to interact on a more effective level? And I think this guy from this small credit union was a great example that, look, I need to listen to my employees more, get feedback from them, let their voice, as we call it, be heard, so they feel like they're participating, and then we kind of go from there. So Scott, I think that's what you're asking for. I think that's what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
But
And it's interesting with the scorecard idea is it could be a combination of soft skills and yet hard skills. So Jerry,
Right.
with those three topics of past, present, future, and future, could you give me one example of what would be something you might have put on like a pattern? All right. Typically we put this kind of item on the scorecard for, and I guess, is it past topics, or is it past on like topic A, present topic A, future topic A, or is it, hey, what have they done in the past, separate topics? What have they done currently, separate topics? That would be my first question. And then my second question would be, what's one practical topic to put in for past, present, and future that you usually measure, that you encourage boards to be on the lookout for, or how to develop future leaders?
Yeah, and for past, we're looking at their past level of experience and seasoning and loyalty, those types of things. So it's
Mhm.
something is certainly measurable. For current, we might look at we might call them concerns of conditions of concern, and we might look at areas like do they have a lack of leadership skills, or lack of management depth, or lack of operational expertise, maybe lack of executive demeanor,
Mhm.
maybe lack of organizational maturity. We had one individual as an example. He was a young in terms of the organization, but was being identified as a potential leader, even a potential CEO. And the one area, he's showing well on all areas, but organizational maturity. In other words, he didn't have that degree of humility sometimes, or that what Peter was talking about, that ability to listen what
Mhm.
other people were saying. And so that was an identified gap or concern. And once you identify it, then you're able to try to do something about it. Um, and yeah, I'll use another basketball example. You guys probably think I'm a sports nut. I am. But anyway, so you take a basketball player, and maybe this basketball player, he shoots a good field goal percentage, he shoots good foul shots, he plays reasonable defense. He does many things, but it was one lack. He's not a great three-point shooter. And in today's world of basketball, that's an important thing. Maybe he's 5 or 6 points below where he needs to be. So the idea is, do we focus just on overall basketball skills? Do we try to focus on helping him with his three-point shot? And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
idea was, let's get him so he can, catch and shoot a three-pointer, or step into a dribble, and, work on those things specifically that help him. And I
Mhm.
think that's what evaluating the scorecard in terms of conditions of concern might be. And then as if we look at, potential predictors, we look at things like propensity to lead based on everything that we've seen. Because, we use history to help forecast the future, right? So we look
Mhm.
at those things that's happened in the past and currently, and then does this person have the capacity to advance? Is this person going to be results oriented? Is he or she a strategic thinker? So those are some of the future things that we look at. Now, yeah, those can be whatever is important to a credit union. In
Mhm.
our system, we have a library of those types of questions with definitions, but they're all subject to being edited or chosen. But so that gives a pretty good picture, I think, in terms of completing a scorecard to
Yeah.
identify where a person is.
And it's really cool. Like Peter, I'm thinking like with a propensity to lead, strategic thinker, results focused, you can definitely see where they are, where there might be conditions for concern or propensity to lead based on just the giant voice and how they utilize it or underutilize it. Jerry, a question I have for you with this scorecard is going back to the basketball analogy. All right. So you're talking about like foul or free throws or things like that. Like there are certain numbers like, hey, that's a 90% completion rate or 90% chance that they could do this, or, oh, they're pretty low here, one out of every three shots. So my question for you is, are there any hard numbers and how do you get those numbers? Or is it that they're filling out a survey like an assessment and you're doing this? Or do you put it to numbers? What do you do on that scorecard?
Yeah, we most of what we have on our scorecard, it's on a 5 point Likert scale where they
Hmm.
can evaluate each of these areas. You know, for an example, lack of leadership. One of the, at a high level would be no concern. There's no concern about that. And at the lowest level would be major concern, and then
Hmm.
there would be the levels in between. And the way we look at it, once the scorecard is completed, the question then becomes, when is this person ready for advancement? Are they immediately ready? Or is it, you know, 6 to 12 months away? Is it 1 to 3 years away? And you can sometimes, now, like I said a little bit earlier, the whole thing isn't based on a quantitative analysis. There's qualitative assessment as well in terms of
Hmm.
cultural fit and competency fits. But let's say, as an example, if a person had an overall scorecard of on a 5 point scale of 4.0 or higher, I'd
Hmm.
say they're probably pretty close to being ready now, assuming the cultural fits there and the competency fits there. So you can use it that way to help, create something that's very defendable.
Yeah.
And you can present that to the board. And at the same time, it identifies those gaps or areas that we can try to do some development and training on to help them work on their 3 point shot, if you will.
Yeah. 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 Man, all right. So what I'm hearing is, all right, there's a 5 point scale, no concern, meaning, all right, they are ready for this. Major concern or somewhat concerned, hey, this is something we need to address or develop. And then there's another part of the scorecard that says, are they ready to advance? And this is great. This is something you could present to your board, quickly update, have an action item, know exactly what to do, be on the same page and communicate. And if I'm hearing you correctly, Jerry, it sounds like these numbers, this is up to the discretion of the CEO to say, this is how confident I feel they are. It's not like if they've achieved this, this, and this, they count as a four, pretty much not concerned. Is that right? Like, it's up to the discretion of the CEO, maybe with your help as a consultant.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the person that does the evaluation is the one most reliable. So if the CEO is doing a succession plan for her or his plan, yeah, they would be the person doing that. If it was CFO, the CFO would be doing that. And then for
Okay.
people underneath the CEO, they do the plan, and then it's kind of flows upward for the CEO's review and approval, or or not approval. That's happened too. We've seen where an executive's done a succession plan and sent it to the CEO for review and approval, and the CEO said, "Well, let's discuss this. I don't know if I see it this way. Convince me." And that's okay too. Then they can have
Hmm.
that discussion, and that might even happen, of course, at the board level. But you
Yeah.
want the person who's we believe, is in the best position to make the assessment on their own successors.
Yeah, man, awesome. Peter, I know with your experience of being a board member and working with leaders, you probably have some thoughts or questions going on in your head right now. What are you thinking?
Well, I think that's fascinating. I mean, I guess I'd like to ask a couple questions. So, when would you do this assessment? Would you do this assessment when you're considering who is going to take over that role, or is this an ongoing thing that you might do every year, or how often are you doing these assessments? Because obviously, you want to see someone improve on their score, right? They don't get a great score. You're giving them the opportunity to work on some of those things. So, how often do you come back to this assessment?
We say annually. They
Annually.
they do
Okay.
this. They do it annually, and it's interesting. It's like we've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now with clients, and you see change. You see
Yeah.
sometimes people leapfrog someone else. Let's say, Susie was the number one candidate, but something happened, and she was leapfrogged by someone else because of levels of performance or issues. And that's all good. But an annual review and update is really important, we think. And the system, the way it's laid out, it's kind of my mantra has always been simple. Make
Yeah.
something so it's not burdensome for users, and that's what we've tried to create with the the Succession Now software. So it's easy to update, it's easy to do, but it's really quite comprehensive.
And that
And do you,
leapfrog, or yeah, keep going.
I was going to say, do you typically share all those results with the board or share only certain people with the board? How does that, as a board
Boy,
member, I'm just curious as to how I would get that information.
that's a great question. That's a really good question because, you know, generally, I'd say when I say generally, probably 95% of the time, the boards only have one employee to supervise or
Right.
manage, and that's the CEO. And so certainly the board has the rights and responsibility of seeing the succession plan for the CEO. If the CEO chooses to show the rest of the succession plans for the other senior management team with the board, that's kind of at their prerogative. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen some CEOs that say, no, that's my responsibility. And so I'm going to manage that. Where other CEOs have been a little bit more collaborative and said, okay, I'm going to bring the board in on this too. So I don't know there's a hard, fast rule for that. And I'm not even sure if there's a best practices. I think it depends a little bit on the CEO and the board.
Yeah.
So I can just tell you from my perspective, when your CEO is leaving and he or she is telling you, hey, we don't have any internal candidates or we do have some internal candidates, the board doesn't have a whole lot of information to go on, right? And so I think that's a fascinating discussion about whether we could see some of those results or not to see if people are improving or if those people are actually ready to take over that spot. And I think that would help us as we were moving forward. But you're right, we only have one employee, so that's where it gets to be, a little bit of a gray area there. How much information should we get and how much information should we see? So,
yeah. And I guess the question then is, how involved is the board? Because it sounds like someone like you, Peter, is like, I want to make sure my credit union's doing well. I'm a member of it, and I want to make sure they're making that. And that goes back to Jerry, what you talked about. It's not just quantitative; it's qualitative. It's making sure that they're a good culture fit. And some CEOs, they view that board as not just a board of directors, but like a board of advisors. Like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about.
If I can add one more point there. If you're doing succession planning, right? We would like to see some growth in some of the folks underneath the CEO, right? We'd like to see some of that, and that would be helpful to know that the plan is actually working, right? You're getting these people the skill set that they need to be successful going forward. So,
and I think that's the ultimate point of leadership, right? The point of leadership is not just a title; it's that you're building leaders. You're building leaders so you can. Not you can, but when you go away, there will be a day where you're gone, and you want to make sure that your organization is fully competent with or without you, and that is what speaks to your leadership. And that's what I'm hearing you say, Jerry, with this importance of, hey, finding your replacement, making this really a habit. Every year, you report the scorecard to everyone, and you just even like the great example you shared of, hey, you might see someone leapfrog. And actually, this brings up a good question. All right, this idea of leapfrog. I had number one candidate, John. All right, and then all of a sudden, Sue leapfrogged. All right, and you in the story you shared, man, it was really good that they saw that. But I don't know if this is a question or a statement, but there seems to be politics sometimes in finding your successor. Oh, this person can't be CEO because, or, oh no, it has to be this person. But you've got the scorecard that might say otherwise. What are some examples? Well, how have credit unions navigated the results of working with you versus I feel like I should do this, and realizing maybe that wasn't the right decision and the scorecard helped them?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it maybe gets back a little bit to management 101, where when you're given the responsibility and the accountability, sometimes you have to make tough calls. And if you have the logic, the reasoning, the numbers in front of you that say that, sometimes you just have to do what you believe is right, irrespective of the personalities involved. And I'm not trying to diminish that at all because I know that's a big part. Everybody has friendships. Everybody has relationships that have been fostered maybe over many years, and they have to make some tough decisions. I think there's good ways to do that. I'm not necessarily an expert on doing that. There's certainly people better, but when you sit down with people and go over tough decisions like that, saying, for example, I'm going to have to select someone that's not you to take over this position. There's good ways and there's bad ways to do that. And what Peter mentioned earlier about listening is certainly really, really important, I think. I mean, you can say, for example, I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're saying, but we need to go this direction. And what that does, it lets them know you're listening to them, you're neutralizing the situation, but you're saying, I'm in charge and I have to make this decision, and I think this is the best decision, as hard as it is. So that happens. That certainly happens. But if you've got the evidence, the numbers, the quantitative and qualitative information to back you up, then you should be able to do that with confidence, even though it might rub somebody wrong.
And I think this is a good transition. I want to land the plane here is this idea of building a bench. So that way, when I talk to the board, hey, I've got these three, or I've got these candidates. My question for you, I want to start with Jerry, and then I think this will naturally maybe go to some parts of that we do in target leadership as well. But Jerry, when you've worked with credit unions and developed this idea of, all right, here's the scorecard, and you've seen some gaps, or, oh, I see a lot of potential here, but hey, they're not ready this year. It might take about 2 years to develop that skill. In this mindset of building the bench, where have been, I'm looking for patterns, all right, patterns. Where are key areas that potential executive leaders need to develop that you've worked with boards?
Well, we call it executive demeanor, which means that do they look the role? Do they look the fit? And that's a nice word, but it means, how do you interact with other executives? How do you interact with the board members? Who do you act with? How do you act with peers? And so it's kind of looking, equal up and above yourself and below yourself, and how do you do that? And so that, to me, that's a trait. That's an executive trait that's really important. That's relatability. Can you relate to all those you're going to have in contact with? And certainly high on the list is the board. And credit union boards, they're not easy because they're made up of a composite of all different types of people. I mean, you might have a former executive or two on there, but you might have a doctor, you might have an attorney, you might have someone who owns a plumbing business, you might have a retired homemaker. I mean, you've got just a cadre of different types of personalities and people and backgrounds and different levels of financial understanding and those types of things. So
Really good
it is
point.
a certain skill, but for someone to elevate in an organization, in a credit union, up in the executive level and shoot up towards CEO, that's a key component, how they can interact and relate with the board. Uh, that social
Yeah.
skill is very, very important, I think.
Man, that's such great insight. And I think one that gets overlooked a lot, but that executive demeanor, do you look and act the part? Are you confident? Are you relatable? Peter, I'm going to ask you this question before we end it off, but in regards to executive demeanor, we've seen the example of listening, but would you say that this target leadership scratches that itch, helps develop people? And how so? What have you seen with this idea of looking, acting the part, being able to relate to others?
Yeah, I would agree with Jerry. I've never used the word executive demeanor, but I think that's exactly what we're talking about, right? What we talk about is, how do others see you, right? Sometimes what we think about in target leadership, okay, here's your assessment, here's your voice, all that stuff. Then we talk about, okay, well, how do other people view this voice, right? Are you coming across in the wrong way? It kind of was Jerry was talking about. Are you able to interact with people in an effective way? If not, let's take a look at how you're interacting with people and see if we can make some modifications to help you become more effective leader going forward. And I think that gets into that executive demeanor, right? How can we make you look better with the people that you're working with? And sometimes just understanding who you are and how you're perceived by others. You may think you're perceived in this perfect way, but when we start to look at some of these traits of these voices and have some conversations about it, they start to realize that, then I realize I'm coming across that way. I probably need to modify a little bit if I do want to take that next step, right? Because I do want to have that executive demeanor.
Mhm.
So we help them start to look at themselves and how others view them. And I think that's what Jerry's talking about, just maybe from a little bit different angle, right? That's what we're talking about. Do you
Yeah.
have the skill set to interact with people to make you that effective leader going forward? So
Yeah, and if I might add one other thing, sometimes it really means developing a little bit of a tougher skin.
yes.
Just recently, a board member made an offhanded accusation that the executives were sandbagging the budget so they could get a higher bonus.
Mm.
Well, that would be certainly very, very easy for someone to take major offense at. It was offensive and it shouldn't have been mentioned, but it was. And so how do you deal with that type of thing in a diplomatic way without
Yeah.
alienating board members and still remaining professional? So
Yeah.
Yeah, we call that a trigger, right? You get triggered. That could be a trigger that would cause you to act out and make you look really bad now to someone.
Insulting my competence for a pioneer. Yeah.
How can you use that to go ahead?
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a fascinating conversation, and honestly, I wish we had more time to hear y'all's stories. This is really, really cool, and I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. So, Jerry, my question for you is: this podcast is not enough time. They're geeking out about the stuff you're talking about. You're saying a lot of stuff that makes sense. They want to start doing the work. Where can they find out more about you? What's the name of your company? You just released a book recently. What's some stuff you've got that people can find to get more information about this?
Our website is successionnow.com. They can go in and look at our system. They can set up for a short demo. They can actually have the book sent to them. On the website, it gives testimonials and different types of things. And we've got as all companies do, we have a customer support staff that can address any of their needs and help them be comfortable with what we're offering. And of course, without saying, would love to have them do that.
Yeah, successionnow.com is what I have. We'll have the link in the show notes. And then the book, what's the book's called? Next Succession Planning, right?
The Next Method. Yeah.
The Next Method.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank y'all so much. Appreciate your time. I know that we've encouraged and inspired current and inspiring leaders. So, guys, we'll see you later.
Thank you very much.
And that was an epic opportunity to learn about succession planning. Peter, what was your biggest takeaway from that podcast?
Man, just how important it is, but and how maybe credit unions aren't doing a good enough job in succession planning. We need to focus more energy and more time to make sure we're following through with getting people the skills that they need. I mean, Jerry talked about that, right? That's an important aspect. Got to get the people the skills to be successful going forward. So, man, just a great podcast. I really enjoyed being a part of it, and I know I learned a lot about succession planning and how to make my credit union successful in the future now.
I agree. I felt like I was at a table that I've always wanted to sit at, or I was like invited into a room that I've always wanted to be a part of, just sitting back, relaxing and enjoying and hearing some of the things that most people in the credit union movement aren't exposed to. Right. Was really kind of eye-opening for me. So thanks for being a part of that, Peter, and thanks for listening to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast.
Interested in submitting a question to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, we want to hear from you. Go in our show notes. We have a link over there, and in that link, it's going to take you to two options. You can submit a question written out through email, or you can submit an audio recording through SpeakPipe. We make it super easy. Go to the link in the show notes, click audio recording. Once you click audio recording, it's going to take you straight to a website where you just press the record button. You've got 90 seconds to submit a question or submit you catching doing somebody do it right. And then you just type in your name and email address, and that's it. It comes straight to us, and we'll take it from there. So you don't need to download anything. You don't need to get any new software. You just go to this website, press record, and click submit, and we're good to go. So go to the link in the show notes. Click if you want to submit a question written out or through audio, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time. Hey, we are on YouTube. We've got video podcasts. So click the link in the show notes. Watch our YouTube video. We're working on how to get videos on Spotify and iTunes, Apple Music, things like that. But what we've learned is that people are 80% more likely to remember something if there's a visual associated with it. So watch our video podcast, comment, let us know how we can be better. Let us be part of your journey. Thank you so much.
Are you looking to be a credit union homie? Are you looking for that drip fab? Our credit union PhD course is for nerds and nuances alike. Let's not forget why we do what we do. Limited to the first 50 participants, the credit union movement is growing, and our credit union PhD philosophy, history, and development class is for new employees and old. That has a fun and interactive 90-minute workshop feel where we talk about the motivation and passion of our early leaders and how that transforms credit unions today. Our cooperative financial institutions were strong and fast growing back in the 1920s and 30s. Let's renew that spirit of non-for-profit cooperative and get your employees into our credit union movement PhD today. Who should attend? Anybody. We look forward to seeing you there.